Hello YouTube, how everyone doing? Like, subscribe, share. This right here is Emanl. I spelled her name wrong in my previous video, but this is a better video, I believe. Now, before, in the beginning, this little girl got taken away from the father and the stepmother, which was abusing her, was beating her with belt buckles. She had bruises. They were so bad, they was like on her. So she get on 5 years probation and they give her to the grandmother. Now the grandmother take care of her. She's smiling. She's looks beautiful. Hair long, really long. As you can see, her hair was really long. And when her promotion was about her whatever was about up, they gave her back to the father and the stepmother. They did not like her, mistreated her, beat her, abused her, and stuff like that. In the beginning, when they gave her back to her, she was running away from home. The cops kept on bringing her back to there. The grandmother wanted her to keep her continuance, but they said, no, we have to give her back, or whatever. So, with that being said, so since the first time she got probation for child abuse, so she decided to go another route. They're in I don't know if I got it, all of it, because it's long and I ain't want to make the video long, but I just want to make my point. Now, she gets her back. She starves the girl. She cuts her hair off. She cut all her hair off. She was 10 years old, only weighing 32 pounds. She was starving her. She will put her in a shower, tie her up to a chair, and run cold water on her. And so she learned her lesson of not beating her. So she decided to do other things where she wouldn't have any bruises on her. Now, ain't that fucked up? That's so fucked up, it made no sense. So, with that being said, that's what she do. Now, what they did to her after they starved her to death, and it was to the point that even feeding her then, it was too late. So, the father didn't take his own daughter to the doctor. He didn't take her to the doctor. He watched that his wife. Now, they had two other kids in the house. Two other kids in the house. She didn't abuse her kids. She didn't do nothing to her kids. She took care of her kids. She loved her kids like a mother should. Now, that wasn't Emanl wasn't her child. It was her stepdaughter. And she abused her. She broke that little girl. She hurt that little girl. She was jealous of that little girl. She despised that little girl. She hated that little girl. Instead of the father being a man and giving his child back to his grandmother, knowing she would be taken care of, knowing she wouldn't be hurting, and he wouldn't have had to worry about her. But no, instead he allowed his wife to abuse her, to belittle her. And even though she was going through all that abuse, she was most happy when she was in school because she was getting fed, because her teachers loved her and stuff like that. Yeah, she hated little girl so much she cut her hair off. I can't find that other picture where have her at the relay. She was like really, really skinny. But I don't think y'all would want to see that memory. It might be in the little court case thing that I got from the news. But you know how that is. You got to go to other channels to get that. So I just only did the news one because, they'd be good to scrap paper channel. But I'm like this. Y'all the news. Y'all get all y'all money and all these other sites. Y'all get y'all money. Why the hell you be mad at somebody else to trying to get out what certain people do to these children? And Please do not try to make it race, because I can't stand when the fact that they make it about race. So, with that being said, I'm you're gonna see some videos and stuff. Yeah, have a nice one.
I wanted her to live and suffer, never, ever, ever get out, because I wanted her to feel what my granddaughter felt. Even if it's taking them out of a home that's being abused, it's worth it, because that's still life. And I would rather have a child taken out of a home to keep them alive than this being a home and the next week they're gone. So that's my goal. I just want to see all children living. I don't want to see death upon any child or anyone.
2010, when Emanl was a 6-year-old first grader. Now, you go back and you heard the testimony of Emanl, and granted, you knew that Emanl and Tiffany had been married just prior to that in 2009, and that Emanl had gotten to know Tiffany. He described their relationship the entire time that they were together as somewhat of a love-hate relationship. You heard that testimony. A love-hate relationship. The state would argue and submit to you that in 2010, just a year later, was the turning point in the entire relationship between that child and this defendant. It was in 2010 when she was that first grader. And as you recall the testimony from Detective King, when she told you that when she talked to Emanl and she spoke to her to find out how she had gotten those bruises, it was because she was told to do her homework by this defendant, and that she had 5 minutes to do her homework, and that when she didn't get it done, that she got beaten. She got beaten with a belt. This defendant stated it was only 2 or 3 times. Admitted that to Detective King. It was only 2 or 3 times. But what you saw, ladies and gentlemen, was you saw the evidence of those 2 or 3 times. Because it wasn't just 2 or 3 times. It was time and time and time again. Because you can look at those pictures, and you can look at that evidence, and you can see that that child had bruises all over her body. She had bruises on her legs, on her arms, on her back, on her chest, everywhere, at the hands of this defendant for not doing her homework when she was 6. What started after that particular time was an utter and horrible downfall, because the relationship was effectively over at that point. Because this defendant blamed that child, blamed a 6-year-old for causing her to lose her job, not be able to have her career anymore that she had gone to college for, that she wasn't able to work, and along with it came financial hardship for that family. As you heard the testimony of Emanl Moss, you heard about how he talked. He had to work multiple jobs in order to try to help. And what ultimately happened was they had Tristan. It was later in that year. The birth of Tristan came, and they had to move back in with family. That they would rely on family in order to help them because of the financial hardships. They are there. They are living. They're back over there. And time again, he would say, we lived back with family. I would work. We would move back out. We would get different apartments. We would go back. We would move back to different apartments. Move forward to 2012. 2 years later, you heard about when they were living alone, because they were not living with a family member at that time. And you remember, I should go back for just a second, because back to 2010, remember what happened? Emanl was removed from the home. She was actually removed from the home and went to go live with her grandmother, Robin. And when she went to Robin's house, remember what Robin told you. Robin told you about how she thrived, how she did better in school. She was finally safe. She was okay. She was doing her work. She didn't seem scared. But what occurred? She was removed back from Robin's care, even though Robin fought for her. And she was put back in the home with this defendant and her father. And what happened? It all started occurring again. Because as I told you, they didn't live with family anymore. They had moved back out, and now you move forward to 2012. You moved 2012, and what did you hear? You heard from officers who came before you about the incidents that happened that summer. You go to the summer of 2012, just after Emanl had finished third grade. At this point, she's 9 years old. She finishes third grade in early July, that first week of July of 2012. She runs away to the leasing office of the apartment complex they lived in. Third grade, just finished third grade. She's at the front of the apartment complex, and she tells them that she doesn't want to live at home. She wanted to run away because her stepmother was not nice to her. Police are called, and when they interview Emanl, you heard from Officer Hill, and he told you, she said that the week before, 7 to 8 days before, she had tied her to a chair and put her in a cold shower. She didn't have evidence of bruising anymore, so what does he do 8 days later? He goes and he speaks to this defendant. And what does she tell him? Remember what she told him? She said, "She's just jealous. She resents my relationship with her dad. She's jealous of me and her father, and she resents her new little brother. She just wants attention. I don't really do any more disciplining of her since I'm on probation. I don't really discipline her anymore. I leave that up to her dad." And with that, the officer didn't have enough probable cause to charge her with a crime. He saw no evidence of bruising, but what did he do? He followed up, he put through a report, hoping that something would be followed up, knowing that this defendant was on probation for beating that child. But he had no other choice. And so what did she do? She went back to that apartment after this defendant knows she's gotten the police involved and is afraid to come home, and she goes back and has to continue living there. So then what happens? It's not even 4 weeks later. It's the end of July. And yet again, what does she do? She is 9 and she runs away. She runs away again in the middle of the evening of that summer. She goes out the door. This defendant knows it, but doesn't call the police for several hours until Emanl got home. Remember what Officer Kirshner told you? It was when her father finally got home a few hours later when he realized his daughter was not there and had not come home. He's the one who called the police, not her. 9 years old, running outside, and has no idea where that child was. But when Emanl gets home, he calls the police to try to find her. And what happens? Detective Kirshner told you that what do they find? They find Emanl at almost 1 o'clock in the morning, asleep in the dark in the bushes of the front of the apartment complex. She was 9. That child was 9 years old and would rather be in the dark, alone, sleeping in the bushes than in the room next to her. What was life like in that house when no one else was watching? You move forward, and fortunately at that particular time, what happens? But she gets to go back to school because finally the school year started. Because that last event when she was sleeping in the bushes was the end of July. So a week, 2 weeks later, she's back at school. She gets to go to a safe place. She's in 4th grade. She's in 4th grade. She eventually gets, in October of that year, she ends up in Mrs. Neal's class. She is thriving. She is doing well. The only problem she had was about her homework. When she went home, that was when it was difficult to get anything done. That was when the problem was. But in 2012 and into the early part of 2013, she was safe. Because during the day, for the vast majority of her waking hours, she was somewhere else. She was not in that house. She was not in that apartment or living anywhere else. She could go to school and be a child. She could go to school and be a 4th grader where she could thrive and she could learn and she could smile and she could fill a room with joy. And she was safe. But what happened? We get to the end of that school year. We get to the end of that school year. Remember what Miss Neal told you? Emanl never had one discipline problem. She never got sent to the principal's office. She wasn't disrespectful. She was never defiant. She did not have one issue with that child. And what did Emanl talk about the most when she was at school? Her little brother. Her little brother, who she said she talked about constantly because how much she adored her little brother. The same little brother that this defendant just a few months earlier had tried to tell the police that she just hated. She was jealous of. She resented him. That same little boy. But when you hear her teacher talk about it, that's all she talked about at school. So we get to the end of that school year and you get to field day, but actually right before that you had Mother's Day. And you heard the testimony about Mother's Day in 2013 because they gathered at Sharon's house. That was Emanl's sister. And remember, it was Sharonese and her kids, and it was Emanl and Tiffany, Imani, Tristan, Emma, and Robin, the grandmother. And what was different about Imani? You saw the photographs. What was different about Imani? It was her hairstyle. And they immediately noticed that something was different. Because Imani had always worn her hair long. She'd either worn it in a braid in the back or in pigtails on the side. She always had beautiful long hair. And it was cut off. Completely cut off and not really styled, just cut off. Sharonese immediately noticed it, but she waited to confront her brother until a little bit later. She called her brother and said, "What did you do to her hair? What happened to Imani's hair?" And what did he say? "Oh, she did it to herself. She cut her own hair off." Sharonese did not believe that for an instant. She knew something was wrong. But then there was Robin, the grandmother. And what did Robin do? She didn't just wait. She didn't call her son later. She confronted the defendant herself at that particular day. She confronted the defendant herself. "What did you do to my baby's hair? What happened to her hair?" And what did the defendant say to her? "If you act ugly, you get to look ugly. If you act ugly, then you should look ugly." She said it to Robin, to her face. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if she would say that to Robin, to her face, what do you think she said to that child when no one was listening? "You are ugly. You are worthless. You are nothing." Move forward a couple days at field day, and you've got field day where they are running and playing. You'll see the pictures of that. Ms. Neal took those pictures. The last pictures we have of Imani alive. Ms. Neal told you that at the end of that school year, she weighed about 50 or 60 pounds, 50 to 60 pounds at that particular time. That, yes, Imani had always been thin, but she was fit. She seemed like a normal, active child. She was petite, but she was healthy when she left Miss Neal's class at the end of that year. And where did they live at that particular time? You heard the testimony of Pearlie Bashir, and you heard the testimony of Brittany Brown. You heard the testimony of Emanl Moss. All of them. They lived at Pearlie's house, and they had lived there for the majority of that school year, from October and into the summer of 2013. They lived there, and why is that important? Because they lived with somebody else. Because there was always someone else watching. Someone else could see. There were other adults around. It wasn't just this defendant and Emanl taking care of those kids. There was another adult, 2, 3 more adults, because Brittany lived there and a male friend of Brittany's. Other people saw them. And so what did you hear from the testimony of Pearlie and Brittany? She seemed fine. Imani seemed fine. Imani would eat when she was at our house. Everything was fine. Yes, there were typical issues that happened between a stepmother and a stepdaughter and children in general, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary when they lived with us. But then what happened? Wanted their own place again, didn't they? This defendant and Emanl wanted their own apartment, and Emanl was working at that particular time already 2 full-time jobs because this defendant had never gone back to work because she had had Tristan, because she had Emma in September of 2012. Now, she had 2 small children, and she had Imani, and she had not been able to go back to work as a teacher because she was on probation for beating Imani. So what did they decide? With 2 full-time jobs by Emanl, he told you they had to have 3 times the salary, or his salary had to be 3 times what the rent was. And so what did he do? He did it. He worked 16 hours a day so that he could get a 3-bedroom apartment, 2-bath apartment for this defendant and his children. That's why the work records, you see the work records to show that, in fact, yes, that is where Emanl was going 16 hours a day. But in the end of August and early September, what did they do? They moved to Veranda Chase here in Gwinnett, and that was absolutely the beginning of the end. It was the beginning of the end for Emanl, because they moved to that apartment, and now what? There is no one else watching. And what do? They decide they're going to homeschool Emanl. They're going to homeschool her. Sharonese, Emanl's sister, knew immediately there were red flags at that moment. Yes, she was a trained teacher, but she hadn't taught in years, and clearly the relationship between her and Emanl was not good. She had 2 small children at home, and Sharonese immediately said, red flags went up. This was a horrible idea. This was a very bad idea. Why would you homeschool her? And what did she do? She was so concerned, she called DFACS. She reported it again, spoke on the phone with DFACS, because she knew that this was not going to be okay. That Emanl was not going to be okay being homeschooled. Because what was homeschool? Homeschooling was code words for isolate and hide. We can isolate this children from everyone she knows. She will not see friends every day. She will not see her family. She will not have a teacher that can save her and protect her. She will be in this apartment, and the only 2 adults will be this defendant and a father who is gone 16 hours a day. She will be hidden from everyone. You heard the testimony from Pearlie, and you heard the testimony from Terrell Bethea, the neighbor that lived there. They are the only 2 people that could tell you that for the months of September and October of 2013, they even saw Emanl. Pearlie told you she saw her one time, if she thought she remembered right. She saw the back of her when she was sitting at a desk doing homework. But she didn't really talk to her. Brittany said she never even saw Emanl when they moved to that apartment. Her own aunt, the defendant's sister, didn't see her. And one neighbor says, I remember seeing the other children often, but I only think I saw the little girl once, the older girl one time. Why? Because she never left that apartment. Because she never went outside. She never went anywhere with them as a family, because she stayed in that room. Homeschooling? No. There wasn't homeschooling going on. You might have asked yourself when we entered, as I said, certain pieces of evidence, and you're thinking, why are they putting in these text messages? Why do these text messages matter? Why do these phone logs matter? What is the relevance of some of these pictures or these photographs? Well, I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, because what you can do is you can look through State's Exhibit 30. State's Exhibit 30B, and it's specifically those text messages. And it's the text messages off Emanl's phone. But they are the text messages that go back and forth between this defendant and Emanl Moss for the month of October. And what you will find is you will find that it was just normal at that house. It was just a way of life. Everything was fine. And you will see in these text messages, it was about food. It was about taking care of Tristan and Emma. It was about small daily life. But the only text messages or references you will find about Emanl in these messages for the entire month of October is about what a pain she was, about what she did wrong, about having to deal with certain things and how it was. But what is the defendant sending? Because these are the types of things that would go back and forth. In the beginning, and you look at it because they go from the back to the front, it's kind of interesting. About food, October 3rd of 2013, from Sexy Wifey, who identified as the defendant in this particular case. To Emanl, bring me a burger if you get off when you eat out. That's on October 3rd. And then she goes on and she talks about, well, bring me that burger. And then she starts talking about Emanl. She starts talking about Emanl on October 8th. Why these things matter? They matter, and I'll show you why. She starts talking about Emanl. I told her last night that if it starts itching, do not touch it, because that means it's healing. She picked at it again last night. Now it's not hard anymore, and it looks infected. She starts talking about that. What could that have been? October 8th. She's picking at her, and then she goes on because she criticized it again. She said she did it because she didn't want to listen, and she felt like picking at it because it was itching. Well, she goes through, and he talks about her where your daughter was picking her bottom or picking her butt. Why is that? Why does that matter? It matters because you heard the testimony of Dr. Stauffenberg. You're the testimony of Dr. Stauffenberg. And what did she talk to you about? What did she talk to you about what was on Emanl's backside, on her bottom, on her left buttocks? That was scabbed and healing. It was a decubitus ulcer. And what is that code for? What is that big speak for? That is for a bed sore. Because that child was laying in that bed in the same position day after day after day. But what is she texting about? Bring me a burger. I cooked tonight. Oh, wait, there's another one. She talks about those types of things. The Blu-ray is out. So, Tristan, can you help me do this so Tristan can watch Netflix on the back TV? Maybe that seems insignificant in normal life, but it's not in this case. Because what she's doing is she's taking care of Tristan and she's taking care of Emma, but she's not taking care of Emanl. She's not feeding Emanl. She's not taking care of her when she's sick or when she's hurt. All she does is complain about that child. Because that child was ugly and that child was nothing to her. She was a nuisance to her. She goes on, and in throughout here you will see where she talks about, she talks about, well, can we do this or can we do that? She talks about going to the movies. And then here it is, October 13th. Your child picked at her ass. That's what she says. Not to mention she picked at her face, too. By October 13th, think about how bad the sore's getting. But before that, she does all of this, and she carries on. Oh, there's text messages in here you can look. I'm craving chocolate. Can you buy me some cookie dough on the way home? Can you buy me some cookie dough and maybe some brownies so I can make them? Do you think she was feeding any of that to that child? She's sending pictures of chicken and rice that she makes on October 8th. The same day that Emanl's lying there and she's mad about the fact that she's picking at her own scabs and her own wounds. That's what she's doing, and that's why those matter. Because when you look at it, ladies and gentlemen, when I talk to you about intent, how you can infer it from the actions, what is this? You can infer intent, because in this particular case, this is so different. Maybe this is another place where this case is different than lots of others. Because in a lot of murder cases, it's a shooting or it's a stabbing, and it is awful and it is horrible, but it is fast and it is quick. But not in this case, because in this case, it was intent day after day after day. When that defendant got up and she made that choice, I'm going to cook chicken and rice tonight, but you're not going to have any. I'm going to bake cookies. Can you smell those? Can you smell those cookies and those brownies? Because I'm craving chocolate, but you're not going to have any. I'll feed Tristan. I'll feed your little sister with all the food that you saw in those pictures in that pantry. I'll cook that food. I'll make that food for them and for me and for your dad, but not for you. Day after day. You want to talk about intent? You want to talk about malice? That's what that is. Every day you get up and you make the choice that you will not feed that child. That is malice murder. That is intent. But it didn't stop there. It continued. Because what does she do? What happens? What happens on October 10th? She sends a text message about Emanl. She burned her damn legs. That's the text message. I think she was reaching for the leftovers on the back of the stove. Now, if you believe the text messages and what her account was, she pulled a pot of hot food or water down on herself and burned herself. If you rely on the text messages, if you rely on what Emanl told you, he told you she called and said that she spilled something like that. That's what it was. All right, that's one of the text messages. But the text messages continue, so look at those. And then she says Emanl burned her legs with her tub water. Okay, which is it? Is it a pot off the stove when she's seeking food, like Dr. Stauffenberg said she would get to that point when she was so hungry? That she's seeking food and trying to find the leftovers that apparently she wasn't even entitled to? Did she burn herself with the pot that fell off the stove, or did she burn herself with her tub water? Now ask yourself the question, why does she have a tub water thing that she spills on herself? Because she wasn't in the bathroom in the tub. Clearly, why does she have tub water that's so incredibly hot that she says she poured her water on her legs because she wanted to see what it would do? None of it makes any sense. Because if she spills her tub water on herself and she scalds herself, well, who got the tub water so hot? Maybe it's the adult at the house. But why is she not in the bathtub? Because she's lying in that room in her own personal prison because that's where she lived and that's where she stayed. So either this defendant dumped the scalding hot tub water on her and spilled it, because I submit to you that child didn't pour tub water on herself because she wanted to see what would happen. By the day that she does that, and you look at the text messages on October 10th of 2013, she was fatigued, she was starving, she was probably having difficulty walking. But she's searching for food, maybe if you believe that one. But what does the defendant do? She puts a little aloe on her legs and puts her back in her room. That's what she put in the text message. I rubbed some aloe on her legs and put her back in the room. You remember the testimony of Dr. Stauffenberg? Those were first or second degree burns. You can see the discoloration on that child's pigment when you look at those pictures that are horrible to look at. But I urge you, you cannot look away, ladies and gentlemen. And you see the burn, 8.5 by 8 inches on that child's midsection. You see that burn, that she laid there. Either she laid there because she laid in a bed where tub water that was scalding was poured on her, or she pulled a pot of boiling food down on herself. Whichever one, does it really matter? She got burned. She got hurt. And she needed to go to see a doctor and get medical attention. And she got none of it. Because they didn't call for help, they didn't call 911, and she put a little aloe on her legs and put her back in her room. Because that's where she needed to stay. Then she sends on October 14th of 2013, Emanl boo-booed on the rug, and she refuses to get it up. This is after she's burned, after she's hungry, and maybe about a week before she has an episode that
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'll be taking it from 12 to 3 today. We got a lot on the plate. Hey, for our chatters, thanks very much for all those great compliments. It's great to be with you. I'll be checking in to see what your questions are on these two fascinating cases that we're covering here on the Law and Crime Network. Welcome back. Listen, let me bring my great guests on. You could not get a better team than this. Judge Ashley Wilcott, a juvenile justice judge and also a host here at the Law and Crime Network, and Gene Rossi, my man, even though he kind of strayed a little bit this week and went with some other hosts. It's okay, Gene. You are forgiven. But he's a great trial lawyer, 30 years with the DOJ, both extremely capable trial people. Guys, let's get right to it. Question one for you. Ashley, I'll start with you. 6 years old, there's contact with the police department. My question, again, my prosecutorial nerve is getting uncomfortable here with this case based on everything that's going on in her representing herself. Is there an argument to be made in the penalty phase that she was an incapable mother and that law enforcement and the authorities should have stepped in earlier and this wouldn't have happened as a potential mitigating factor weighing against the death penalty. Thoughts?
No, I don't think it should be a mitigating factor. Is it true that there was a system fail, that a lot of different people touched this child and should have been able to prevent this death from happening? Yes. I do not think that's a mitigating factor, because that does not excuse or make any better the fact if this parent is convicted of abusing, torturing, and killing her own stepchild.
Okay. Jean, we've talked about this a couple times before. She's representing herself, chose not to give an opening statement, not cross-examine any witnesses. The reason I'm worried as a prosecutor is, one, does this affect the jury who says, you know what, even though she chose to do it, we really don't know her side of the story? Or two, is this maybe an effective strategy, as I indicated before, that you don't want to really go after the guilt phase of the case when it's a lock for the state, but you want to put all your eggs in the basket of the penalty phase where you're trying to get life without parole as opposed to death? Could this be what's in her mind?
No. I think her strategy is this. She's going to be so incompetent that when the appellate court sees the lack of effort in defending herself in the face of the death penalty, I don't think an appellate court's going to affirm this conviction. Now, I would want to add, she didn't do an opening statement. That doesn't mean she eventually will not, because she can reserve it for her case in chief if she puts something on, but not to cross-examine people. It appears these could be important witnesses, not to cross-examine them. That's a recipe for disaster, but maybe she wants the appellate court to see the disaster.
Gene, I'm going to come to you first. I find this very compelling testimony for the prosecution, because what the jury is hearing is that, if I got this right, and correct me if I'm wrong, the victim in this case, the little 10-year-old girl, is not her biological child, and she was abused, presumably for a number of years. But the other two children that were her biological children were well managed and cared for, which shows me that as a prosecutor, I would be railing, is that she made a specific choice against a specific child. She knew exactly what she was doing. What do you think?
Well, the thing about this testimony is twofold. One, you got motive. The child, Emanl, is not the blood of the defendant. And for whatever reason, the defendant didn't have that affection for Emanl that she obviously had for her own blood. And number two, when you go to the death penalty phase, one of the aggravating factors will be, I'm sure, given to the jury, what's the level of premeditation that was shown in this trial that resulted in a death. And according to Robin Moss, the grandmother, there was a lot of premeditation. She wouldn't allow the grandmother to come to the home. She was isolating other members of the family, including the grandmother. That all goes to premeditation and a calculated decision to torture and kill Emanl.
Gene Rossi, you know what I'm about to say. I have mad respect for the guy who's in charge, or the girls in charge of the office, that gets up there and puts it on the line in a serious case like that, because we should have more prosecutors' offices that are run by people who are real trial lawyers, like this guy obviously is. How do you think about how he's doing in there?
I love this guy. Old school. No PowerPoint. No notes. No fancy charts.
Yeah.
Just oratory.
Yeah, Gene, we talk about that so much for our lawyers, young lawyers that watch us, or law students. It's so powerful when you're not distracting the jury with all of this extraneous, hoopla. He is the center of attention, delivering a great job. Let's listen to some more. Okay, Gene, obviously doing an effective job, and when he's going through the details of the cover-up, it's not just only insanely insensitive, if that's even the word that you'd use for what the defendant is alleged to have done, and callous, but all these actions show consciousness of guilt. What do you think?
Oh, yes, and more important, it shows the complete and total disregard for someone who's a member of your family, even though the person does not have your blood. And I got to tell you, God help her in the death penalty phase, because I don't see any mitigating factors. Absolutely not.
Right, and but do you think for her, given the way the prosecutor's laying this case out and the evidence that they have, that it could be a smart move not to insult the jury by trying to cross-examine your way out of the guilt phase and save your fire for the penalty phase if you were the defendant? I'm just saying, if you're trying to save your life.
You know what, Bob? When we just took the break, I was actually thinking about that exact thing. If she had attorneys, they probably wouldn't cross-examine many of the witnesses. So maybe she's either thinking of that herself or she's taking some advice from the standby counsel. That is a strategy that in the guilt phase, you don't put up a fight and you save it all for the penalty. That could be possible.
And Gene, you know, there's an inherently different feel if a lawyer is attacking your mother, is attacking the government's witnesses, as opposed to you personally as you're trying to save yourself doing it, which could come off as being you know, rude and arrogant. If your lawyer does it, it's almost expected. So it's hard to get up there and start cross-examining witnesses because it just makes you more unlikable.
Right. There was a famous case in Long Island, Colin Ferguson. He went on a train and he took a machine gun basically and killed several people. He represented himself and he was cross-examining some of the victims who were shot but did not die. And wow, it did not go well. I think that was in the 1990s.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see if a lawyer were doing it, it would be expected. It's a little bit of distance there, and when you're doing it and you're the ones alleged to have harmed the victims that you're getting in their face in a courtroom, it can really spin off in bad ways. Gene Rossi, you're always giving us a great commentary. Thank you. One of the witnesses, as we were just talking about, is the grandmother who testified. That's Robin Moss. So just think about it, folks. When you guys are listening to this examination, should she have gotten up there and cross-examined or just let it lie and put all her eggs in the penalty basket? I mean, the evidence is piling up here. I mean, not a good look for the defendant, where the grandmother is getting up and saying that to cut the girl's hair, and when asked why, is you act ugly, you look ugly. Not good.
I'm wondering if this defendant has an argument that she had a diminished capacity, because this is just cold and calculated.
Yeah. Gene, it's funny you should say that. I'm going to ask the producers when we're offline. I don't know the answer to this, but you bring up a good point here about if you're going to go penalty phase only, put all the eggs in the basket, the typical, standard, prototypical thing you do as a defense lawyer is present expert testimony to try to give some explanation and context to the jurors as to why a person did such a heinous thing, but I'm not sure whether or not we're going to see that in this case, and that all presupposes she's got the capability of knowing how to even examine those witnesses, should she even have them.
Right. You know what, Bob? You know what could happen in the penalty phase is the judge may take control and say, listen, defendant, I'll allow you to represent yourself to a limited degree, but I have discretion to have standby counsel over your objection, because your life is on the line, to put on some type of mitigating case. And I bet you the judge does that.
Let me ask you, Gene, any hope for the defendant in the penalty phase should it go like this? I haven't fought this. I didn't even ask any questions. I didn't want to waste anybody's time. She's giving an allocution to the jury, which you're allowed to do in a penalty case. I'm terribly sorry for what I did. It was horrible. I'm a bad person, and I deserve to die. But please don't kill me for one reason: my other children who still need their mother. Could be an argument that catches one person.
You know what, Bob? If she did it and did it in 10 minutes, I think you're right. She would have either a hung jury or possibly life imprisonment.
All righty, guys. Gene Rossi, stick with us. We're going to clean up some house here, do a little business, get in that chat room, find out some more answers to those expert questions for you. Law and Crime Network. We're going to break. We'll be right back. Okay, so Gene Rossi, that's the fourth grade teacher. After that year, the little Emanl was taken out of the school, homeschooled. But listen to the power of this testimony. I know you know this for sure. Talking about her, that she wanted to be friendly with bullies, that she was sweet, precious, great adjectives to describe this little girl. That when there was this one person that was mean to her, look at her right there on the camera, she kept trying to be nice. and that she would face would light up when she would speak, about other children and her siblings. So there, in addition to the fact that that's great impact testimony emotionally, to me, it's also showing she wasn't a problem child that needed to be physically corrected.
Yes, that would be the major proffer, because this is really testimony that should be in the penalty phase versus the guilt phase. But that would be the proffer that the prosecutors probably are putting this witness forth. It just shows that this Emanl had incredible potential, and her life was just snuffed out.
All right, Gene. So we got some authentication going on here with the officer. The state's case is moving with blinding speed. Vincent Hill indicated he thinks it may be over with by Friday, at least the guilt phase. Probably quickest death penalty case I've seen. How about you?
I'm hearing two things. I think I heard you. I think, Bob, this case could end Friday or Monday.
I'm waiting with bated breath, Gene, on what she does in the penalty phase of this. I mean, we can only guess at this point, and we've batted it around. It could be a rather effective strategy. And, Gene, to the point of the other lawyers that are there in the courtroom with her, although they're not participating, she did on 2 occasions go back to them during jury selection and seemed to be nodding when they were speaking to her. And she had kind of like the cadence down with the photographs in terms of agreeing to allow them to be admitted. So maybe she is listening to them.
Yes, I get the feeling that during breaks or after court is out of session, she is getting sort of a law school class course on how to try a case in real time, because she does appear to understand sort of the cadence, why exhibits are shown to her. I got to tell you this, Bob. I'm a firm believer that the jury is always looking at that defendant. Always, always, always. And the optics of her sitting by herself with an empty chair behind her just shows a level of isolation that I don't think is helping her.
Yeah, and to Judge Ashley Wilcott's statement and her assessment was that, and it may have been yours as well, Gene, that she doesn't seem to be too impacted or moved by some of this compelling testimony. And certainly the jury will be looking at that, and that will not be in her favor. Gene, our time together is coming to a close. I'm going to leave it to you for the next 60 or so seconds. You're a trial trainer of prosecutors. Everybody can be a little bit different. Everyone has different styles and different cadences and different personalities. But this guy hits high notes. There's something that imbues credibility. I love his style.
There are 2 things that strike me about him, among many, is he uses the pause. Silence can be deafening. And what he does is he makes a statement or statements, and then he pauses. And he lets that jury ponder the 3 or 4 sentences that came out of his mouth. The second thing he does is he uses simple language that appeals to the common sense of the jury, because in any trial, Bob, the common sense of the jury is the soul of that entity.
Gene, you know that I often say that that's it. Common sense, common sense, common sense. It doesn't need to be sophisticated. It doesn't need to be pretty. It needs to be real and to the gut. Guys, this is the Law and Crime Network. If you want to find Gene Rossi, go to Rossi4VA. That's his Twitter handle. And mine at rbianchiesq. We love to have you aboard. Keep watching. The great Linda Kenny Bod is next to pick up the coverage. I'll see you next week. right, that's part of the prosecution's opening statement. And as scintillating as that is, because we all love to listen to what the state's case is when it opens, is perhaps something even more scintillating, and that is the awesome Vincent Hill, a host at the Law and Crime Network. Vincent Hill, you remind me of that Star Trek, the old Star Trek, where they go into a bubble and they transport. You're in New York hosting. You're in Georgia now, actually covering this trial. Welcome back, Vince.
Hey, Bob, welcome back. I thought you were going to say I was Mr. Spock for a second there, Bob.
Well, you know what, brother? You got it all. You know, you got that mental ability. You're unbelievable. Hey, Vince, listen, I mean, this is really a fascinating case. And so far, she has not been really participating. I'm curious, is there a method to the madness here in terms of how she's handling herself in this trial? And some of the jurors seem to be a little disconcerted by the idea that she doesn't have legal representation. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so, Bob, I got to tell you, after those opening statements by the prosecution, and one thing I want to point out, he did say during his opening statements that Tiffany beat the lights out of little Emanl. And I know we have some photos that were shown earlier in the courtroom of little Emanl with those bruises. But one of the things the jury focused on was right after the opening statements by the prosecution, of course, they were waiting for opening statements. You can see those photos there. They were waiting for opening statements from Tiffany Moss, the defendant in this case. And there was a look of shock between the entire courtroom, throughout the entire courtroom, when she said, hey, I'm not doing opening statements now, nor will I be doing opening statements. And more importantly, Bob, we've heard some pretty compelling testimony from a Sergeant King, who was a detective from Special Victims Unit at the time. She took those photos that we saw of little Emanl. You would expect there to be cross-examination during that. There was not. We heard testimony from another police officer who responded in 2010 when little Emanl attempted to run away. We would expect cross-examination from that. We saw none. So just prior to lunch, you know, the prosecutor in this case, Mr. Porter, said, we're moving on a lot faster than we expected. We have 5 more witnesses. 4 will take us to the early part of the afternoon. The last witness, which we expect to be Emanl Moss, the father of little Emanl, will be the last witness. They expect that testimony to be a little longer. But now he's saying that this case could be over by Friday, Bob.
Wow, amazing. You know, a death penalty case, the judge tried to instruct her the significance of this. She has a constitutional right to represent herself. Vince, as a prosecutor, a homicide prosecutor in particular, I don't know why I'm getting nervous if I'm in there. I don't know why I'm worried that the jury may feel that even though she has a right to do it, and even though they were questioned about it, that she didn't get an adequate representation, that life in prison without parole is appropriate. My prosecutor thing is getting nervous about this. Am I in the ballpark here?
No, I think you are in the right ballpark. And I think, honestly, there's a method to Tiffany Moss's madness, and that's what she's hoping for, that this jury will say, well, I can't really sentence her to death because, remember, Bob, during jury selection, there was a lot of talk, well, I'm not, for the death penalty. A lot of people were confused and didn't understand why she was representing herself. So that could very well be the case. That could be the method to the madness here, that maybe she won't get the death penalty. Maybe she will just get life without the possibility of parole, or maybe even life with parole, Bob.
Yeah, Vince, what do you think about the concept that, listen, as a prosecutor who's prosecuted death penalty cases myself, I used to think that it was ill-advised but for the defense lawyers to really hammer anything in the guilt phase when it was very clear their person committed the murder. But really, I thought the better lawyers, defense lawyers, put all their eggs in the penalty basket. In other words, they basically knocked down the death penalty and tried to get life without parole. Could she be doing that?
Yeah, I think so, because, her attorneys are sitting just one row behind her. So, although she's not communicating with them, I've been watching them. They're taking a lot of notes. There's a team of about 4 or 5 people that are on that legal team that are there with their laptops. They're taking notes, things of that nature. They're even mumbling amongst themselves when they think there should be an objection going on. But, of course, she is representing herself in this case. So that could be, Bob. They may be waiting to get to the penalty phase and see where it goes from there.
Vince, tell us, when the jurors were listening to the opening statement and some of the pretty compelling testimony from the first couple of witnesses, any emotional reaction from the jurors?
Absolutely. There was one juror, a female juror in the back row. She had her head down through some of that testimony, especially when those pictures came up, Bob. There were a lot of people shaking their heads. I even heard people in the courtroom just moaning and groaning at those pictures. And, you know, I got to say, Bob, I've seen a lot in my days in policing. I'm sure you have. It even touched me in a special way because, yes, our job is to report on these cases and be unbiased. But at the end of the day, we are human. I'm a father. I have a daughter. We heard testimony from Robin Moss, the grandmother of little Amani, who said yesterday, Bob, would have been Amani's 16th birthday. On yesterday, she should have been celebrating her sweet 16th. Unfortunately, that is not the case.
Sad, Vincent, no question about it. The great transportive Vincent Hill, hosting in New York, reporting in Georgia. Thanks a lot, Vincent. Appreciate your insights.
Always a pleasure, Bob.
Okay, we'll see you soon.
I want you to know that Daddy made a terrible mistake, and he is very sorry from the bottom of my heart.
A jury of 6 men and 6 women will continue deliberations this morning in the sentencing phase for the murder trial of Tiffany Moss. She was convicted of murdering her 10-year-old stepdaughter, Amani. Little surprised, since she put up no defense as her own lawyer, didn't give any opening statement or closing argument, didn't ask a single question, and didn't speak up even in the sentencing part of the trial. The jury, they asked the judge if they could go home and sleep on it. They're going to be back here this morning. We'll let you know when they do have a decision and hear the only response they got from the defendant, coming up on Channel 2 Action News Live this morning at 6:30 a.m.